They say the desert is empty. They say you can see a threat coming from miles away on those long, flat highways. They are lying to you. I'm telling you this as a warning. The emptiness is a trap. What I met out there didn't hide in the dark. It stood directly in my high beams, 8 feet tall and waiting for me. If you think your steel doors and your high speeds keep you safe, you need to listen closely, because I survived the ambush, but I didn't survive the fear. Before we enter the heat, let's meet the man who lived through it, a veteran of the long haul. He shared this account that will change the way you look at the sands, especially when the moon is full. I'm putting this on record because I have to. Maybe just to prove to myself I'm not crazy, even if my life has been shattered since that run. My name is Kenneth. I am 42 years old and I am, or rather used to be, a truck driver, 20 years behind the wheel, 20 years crisscrossing the Southwest through dust storms and heat waves. I thought I'd seen it all. I've seen bad wrecks. I've seen drifters walking miles from nowhere. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the ambush that was waiting for me on a desert highway in Arizona. I was hauling a full load of copper wiring out of Kingman, heading southeast toward Phoenix. It was one of those runs I usually looked forward to, a straight shot through the high desert where the world stretches out so wide and flat you feel like you're driving on the surface of the moon. My rig, a 2018 Kenworth with a sleeper cab that felt more like home than my actual house did some days, was humming that low, steady diesel growl that every trucker knows. It's a sound that gets into your bones, a constant vibration that usually puts me at ease, letting me know the machine is working, the wheels are turning, and the miles are disappearing beneath me. At 2:00 a.m. in the Arizona desert, the darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's a physical weight. There were no city lights bleeding into the sky, no glow from distant towns on the horizon. It was just the obsidian black of the pavement merging with the black of the sky, separated only by the billions of stars that looked cold and indifferent overhead. My high beams were twin lances of white fire cutting a tunnel through that darkness, illuminating the center line and the occasional flash of a reflector post. I've always loved the isolation, or at least I used to. There's a hypnotic beauty to the desert at night that you don't get anywhere else in the country. The saguaro cacti stand like silent sentinels along the shoulder, their twisted arms frozen in weird, human-like poses against the indigo sky. During the day, they look majestic. At night, under the fleeting sweep of headlights, they look like people watching you pass, waiting for you to stop. But I wasn't planning on stopping. I had a deadline, and I had a rhythm. Inside the cab, the air conditioning was blasting, keeping the dry desert heat at bay. The dashboard was lit up like a Christmas tree with soft green and amber gauges, oil pressure good, temperature steady, fuel tank full. I took a sip of black coffee from my thermos, the bitter taste grounding me. This was my kingdom. When you're sitting 8 feet off the ground, wrapped in 40 tons of American steel and chrome, you feel invincible. You feel like the biggest, meanest thing in the valley. A coyote crosses the road. Too bad for the coyote. A drunk driver swerves into your lane. You blast the air horn and watch them scramble. Physics is on your side. That was the lie I told myself for 20 years. That was the false sense of security that the road sells you. You think that because you have the horsepower and the weight, you're the predator. You think the metal shell around you is a fortress that keeps the chaos of the natural world out. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, my calloused hands familiar with every groove. The radio was turned down low, just a faint buzz of classic rock struggling to push through the static that gets bad when you're this far out. I didn't mind the static. It was better than the silence. The silence out there is heavy. It presses against the glass, trying to find a way in. I remember checking my mirrors, a habit ingrained in me since my first year on the job. The long, rectangular side mirrors showed me nothing but the red running lights of my trailer and the black void behind me. No headlights, no tailgaters. I hadn't seen another car in 45 minutes. It was just me and the hum of the tires on the asphalt, a rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum that can put you in a trance if you're not careful. We call it white line fever, that point where your brain goes on autopilot and the truck seems to drive itself. But I wasn't zoning out that night. I was awake, hyper-aware of the stark beauty around me. I remember thinking about how clean the desert looked, how undisturbed. It felt like a place that didn't want people in it, a place that merely tolerated the ribbon of asphalt we'd laid across its back. The sagebrush and the mesquite scrub rushed by in a blur of gray and brown. The heat waves radiating off the tarmac distorted the air in front of me, making the distant road look like it was rippling, like water. I stretched my neck, hearing a satisfying pop, and settled deeper into the air ride seat. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. I was in my bubble of climate-controlled air, separated from the hostile environment by safety glass and steel. I thought about Stephanie back home, probably asleep, the house quiet. I thought about the paycheck this run would bring. I thought about everything except what was actually out there in the dark. The road curved gently to the left, winding around a massive rock formation that blocked the moonlight. The shadows grew longer, deeper. The high beams caught the eyes of something small, a jackrabbit maybe, darting into the brush. Just nature doing its thing. Just the desert living its secret nocturnal life while I roared past, an intruder who thought he owned the place. I had no idea that the hierarchy of the road was about to be rewritten. I had no idea that my 40-ton fortress was nothing more than a tin can to what was waiting for me up ahead. I just took another sip of coffee, checked my mirrors one more time, and drove deeper into the trap, letting the hypnotic isolation of the Arizona night lull me into the worst mistake of my life, believing I was alone. The transition from total calm to absolute terror didn't happen all at once. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, creeping wrongness that started about 10 miles past the last mile marker I'd consciously noted. The hypnotic rhythm of the tires changed first, a subtle shift in the vibration, like the road's surface itself had grown tense. I saw it as a smudge of darkness against the gray ribbon of asphalt. At first, my brain filed it away as debris. You see it all the time. A shredded tire tread from a retread blowing out, a black trash bag that fell off a pickup, maybe a dead coyote. My foot hovered over the brake pedal, not pressing it, just preparing. A reflex honed over 2 decades. You don't swerve for small things in a rig this size. You hold the line. If you swerve, you roll. But the smudge didn't flatten as I got closer. It grew. It wasn't a tire. It was too tall. My mind cycled through the next logical options. A broken-down car with its lights off. A cow that had wandered through a broken fence. That happened out here. Hitting a cow at 65 miles per hour is like hitting a brick wall. I engaged the Jake brake, the engine letting out a guttural staccato roar that shattered the silence of the night. The truck shuddered as it began to decelerate, the heavy load of copper wiring behind me pushing against the cab, eager to keep its momentum. I squinted through the windshield, my eyes straining against the glare of my own high beams. The object was dead center in my lane. It wasn't moving. A deer freezes, sure, but a deer reflects light. Its eyes act like mirrors. This thing absorbed the light. It was a black hole in the middle of the desert, drinking in the illumination of my LED headlights and giving nothing back. I pressed the brake pedal harder, the hiss of air angry in the quiet cab. The speedometer dropped, 50, 40, 30. The distance was closing fast and the shape was resolving into something that made no sense. It wasn't metal. It wasn't a cow. It was fur. It was a wall of thick, matted, dark fur standing right on the yellow center line. My brain simply refused to process the scale of it. I brought the Kenworth to a shuddering halt about 20 yards away, the cab rocking gently on its suspension as the momentum finally died. The engine idled, a low, nervous rumble. I sat there for a second, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The dust I'd kicked up drifted past the windows like ghostly smoke, settling in the beams of light. "Move," I whispered, the word dry in my throat. I reached up and pulled the cord for the air horn, HOOONK. The sound blasted through the desert night, loud enough to wake the dead. Any animal, bear, mountain lion, elk, would have bolted. They scramble, they panic. Their instinct is survival. The shape didn't flinch. It didn't twitch a muscle. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the thing shifted. It wasn't a quadruped rising onto its hind legs. It was already standing. It unfolded itself, straightening up to its full height, and that's when the air left my lungs. The top of its head cleared the height of my grill. It kept going up. My headlights, which sit high on a semi, were hitting it square in the chest. This wasn't a bear. A bear is round, heavy, clumsy-looking even when it's dangerous. This thing was built like a nightmare sculpture of muscle and rage. It had the V-shaped torso of a bodybuilder, broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrow waist, covered in bristly hair that looked like a mix of charcoal and old ash. The fur was matted in places, clumped with something dark and wet that glistened in the harsh white light. I couldn't look away. I wanted to put the truck in reverse, to U-turn, to run, but I was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. It took a step toward me. The movement was fluid, terrifyingly graceful. Its legs were wrong, backward bending like a dog's, the hocks high off the ground, but it walked with the balance of a man. It planted a massive foot on the asphalt, and I saw claws, not nails. Claws. They were black, curved, and long, looking like obsidian knives digging into the road surface. Then it raised its head. The snout was long and lupin, black lips pulled back just enough to show the gleam of yellowed ivory. But it was the eyes that broke me. They caught the high beams and didn't just reflect them. They burned back. They were a sickly, glowing yellow-green, set deep in that wolf-like skull. Animals look at you with fear or hunger or confusion. They look at the truck, the big loud machine. This thing ignored the truck. It looked through the windshield. It looked through the glass, through the distance, and looked directly at me. There was intelligence in those eyes, a cold, malevolent calculation. It wasn't standing there because it was confused. It wasn't roadkill waiting to happen. It had positioned itself in the darkness, on a blind curve of the highway, waiting for a vehicle to come along. It was a blockade. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning washed over me, starting at the base of my skull and freezing my blood. This wasn't an animal crossing. This was an ambush. It had stopped me. It had forced 40 tons of steel to a standstill just by standing its ground. And now that I was stopped, now that I was trapped in its domain, it was coming for the driver. The creature took another step, closing the distance to 10 yards. It exhaled, a cloud of steam venting from its nostrils into the dry night air. It knew I was in here. It knew I was afraid. And worst of all, it knew I was alone. In just a moment, I'm going to tell you how this creature tore through 40 tons of steel to get inside the cab. But first, if you want to survive the horrors waiting for you on the lonely highways of this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to be left alone in the dark for what comes next. The standoff broke with a violence that defied physics. The creature didn't just run. It exploded from its standing position, closing the 10-yard gap between the asphalt and my bumper in a blur of dark motion. There was no time to brace myself, no time to reach for the tire iron I kept under the seat. There was only the sudden, sickening thud of massive weight slamming into the front of the Kenworth. The entire cab jolted backward, the suspension groaning under the impact. My coffee thermos flew off the dashboard, splashing hot black liquid against the passenger door, but I didn't feel the burn. I couldn't feel anything but the cold paralysis of primal fear. The grille, a reinforced wall of chrome meant to withstand deer and highway debris, crumpled with the screech of tortured metal. Through the windshield, I watched in horror as the creature didn't bounce off. It held on. A clawed hand, looking more like a gauntlet of charred bone and obsidian, slammed onto the hood of the truck. Then another. The metal groaned and tore, the sound high-pitched and piercing like a scream. Those claws, thick as railroad spikes and sharp as knives, punched through the fiberglass and aluminum of the hood as if it were wet cardboard. It was pulling itself up. "No," I choked out, the word barely a whisper. "No, no, no." It rose above the dashboard, filling my field of vision. The high beams were now illuminating it from below, casting long, demonic shadows across its face. Up close, it was hideous in a way that biology couldn't explain. The snout was wrinkled in a snarl, black lips pulling back to reveal gums that were gray and wet, framing teeth that were yellowed and far too big for any earthly skull. But it was the eyes that froze my soul. Separated from me by only a thin layer of laminated safety glass, those glowing yellow-green orbs locked onto mine. There was no animal confusion there. There was recognition. It looked at me with a hateful, burning intelligence that felt ancient. It wasn't just attacking a truck, it was attacking me. It wanted to get inside. It wanted to peel this cab open like a tin can and drag me out into the desert night. The creature reared back one of its massive arms and swung. Crack! The windshield didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed. A white starburst of fractures exploded directly in front of my face, right where the creature's fist had connected. The safety glass held, but barely. A second blow would finish it. I saw the creature draw back its arm again, the muscles under that matted, filthy fur coiling like steel cables. My survival instinct finally overrode the terror. I wasn't going to die here. I wasn't going to let this thing pull me out and eat me on the side of State Route 93. I slammed my foot onto the clutch and jammed the stick shift into the lowest gear I could find, not caring if I grinded the transmission to dust. I hammered the accelerator to the floor. The Kenworth roared. The massive diesel engine, designed to pull 80,000 pounds up a mountain, unleashed all its torque at once. The truck lurched forward, the tires screaming as they fought for traction on the grit-covered asphalt. The creature lost its footing on the hood as the truck surged. It scrambled, its claws carving deep, jagged furrows into the metal, sparking against the steel beneath the paint. It slid toward the passenger side, its weight rocking the cab, but it didn't let go. It anchored itself, sinking those obsidian claws into the passenger door frame, hanging on like a tick. I was doing 20, then 30. The engine was redlining, screaming in protest. I stared into the side mirror and saw it. It was clinging to the side of the cab, its face pressed against the passenger window now, staring in at me, mouth open in a silent roar that was lost under the noise of the engine. It raised a fist to smash the passenger glass. "Get off!" I screamed, my voice cracking. I saw a mile marker reflector flash by. I made a desperate choice. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and wrenched it hard to the left, crossing the double yellow line, and then violently whipped it back to the right. It was a maneuver that would have flipped a lesser vehicle. The trailer swayed dangerously behind me, the tires howling in protest as the weight shifted violently. The centrifugal force was immense. The creature held on for a second, its claws screeching against the metal door as they were dragged through the steel. But the laws of physics were finally on my side. The violent sway whipped the cab to the right, and the creature's grip failed. I heard a heavy, wet thump against the side of the sleeper berth, and then it was gone. I didn't hit the brakes, I didn't slow down. I kept the pedal buried in the floor mat, shifting gears as fast as my trembling hand could manage. Fourth, fifth, sixth. The speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. The rig was shaking, rattling from the abuse, but I pushed it harder. I stared into the West Coast mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The red tail lights of the trailer illuminated a cloud of dust on the road behind me. In the center of that red haze, I saw a silhouette standing on the yellow line. It wasn't dead, it wasn't even lying down. It was standing there watching me go. I drove like a madman. I drove until the engine temp gauge started to creep into the danger zone, and even then, I barely lifted my foot. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't drink my coffee. I just stared straight ahead at the tunnel of light carved by my single working headlight, praying that the lights of civilization would appear on the horizon before my mind snapped completely. The image of those yellow eyes, shining with pure hatred through the spider-webbed glass, was burned into my retinas. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, that I hadn't escaped. I had just survived the first round. The lights of the Phoenix Industrial Park didn't bring me the relief I had prayed for. They buzzed with a sickly, fluorescent hum that felt artificial and fragile against the backdrop of the night I had just survived. I pulled the Kenworth into the distribution center lot, the air brakes hissing with a sound that usually signaled the end of a job well done. Tonight, it sounded like a dying gasp. I sat in the idling truck for a long time. My hands were locked onto the steering wheel, my fingers cramped into rigid claws. I tried to command them to open, to release their death grip on the leather, but my nervous system was still redlining, stuck in that moment on the highway where fight or flight had turned into pure, animalistic survival. I looked at the passenger window. The spider web of cracks where that thing had punched the glass caught the yard lights, fracturing the world outside into 1,000 broken pieces. The door to the warehouse bay rolled open, and a figure stepped out holding a clipboard and a travel mug. It was Brown, the night foreman. He was a good man, practical to a fault, the kind of guy who measured his life in shipping manifests and on-time deliveries. He squinted against the glare of my headlights, waving me forward into the bay. I couldn't move. I couldn't put the truck in gear. I just watched him, terrified that if I looked away from the mirrors, the creature would be there, crouching on the fuel tank, waiting for me to step out. Brown frowned, lowering his hand. He walked toward the cab, his pace brisk, annoyed. I watched him approach the front of the truck. I saw the moment his annoyance died. He stopped dead in his tracks about 10 feet from the grill. His jaw went slack. The clipboard dropped to his side, forgotten. He stared at the front of my rig, his eyes tracing the devastation. The crumpled chrome, the hood that looked like it had been chewed by a trash compactor. He walked around to the driver's side, climbed up onto the step and hammered on my door. "Kenneth, Kenneth, open up. Are you hurt?" The sound of his fist on the metal made me jump so hard I slammed my knees against the steering column. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so violently I could barely work the latch. Finally, the door swung open, and the smell of the warehouse, dust, dry cardboard, and diesel, rushed in. It should have smelled like safety. Instead, it just smelled like a trap. "I'm okay," I croaked. My voice sounded foreign, like it was coming from someone else's throat. I'm okay." "Okay," Brown looked at me, his eyes wide. "Ken, look at you, you're white as a sheet, and look at your truck. What the hell did you hit? A brick wall." I climbed down, my legs feeling like jelly. As soon as my boots hit the concrete, my knees buckled and I had to grab the door handle to keep from face planting. Brown caught my arm, steadying me. His grip was firm, human, and real. It was the first real thing I'd felt in 2 hours. "Come look at this," he said, guiding me toward the front. I didn't want to look, I didn't want to see the evidence, but he pulled me around. Under the harsh floodlights of the loading dock, the damage was undeniable. The massive chrome grille was caved in, twisted inward like tin foil. But it wasn't the impact damage that made Brown quiet, it was the hood. There were 4 distinct punctures in the reinforced fiberglass, spaced perfectly apart. They weren't cracks from a collision. They were stab wounds. "What is that?" Brown whispered, tracing a finger near one of the holes. "It looks like pickaxes went through the hood." He walked around to the passenger side and I followed, dragging my feet. This was the worst part. The passenger door, where the creature had anchored itself, looked like it had been attacked with a giant can opener. The metal was shredded. 3 long, parallel gouges ran from the window frame down to the skirting. The paint was stripped away, the steel underneath curled up in jagged ribbons. "I've seen jackknives," Brown muttered, kneeling to look closer at the gouges. "I've seen rollovers. I've seen guys hit elk at 70 miles an hour. I ain't never seen this." He looked up at me, his face pale in the artificial light. "Kenneth, what did you hit?" The truth was right there on the tip of my tongue. I didn't hit anything, Brown. I was ambushed. A werewolf, a dogman, a monster stood on the highway and tried to peel me out of this truck like a sardine. I looked at Brown. I saw a man who worried about union breaks and fuel surcharges. If I told him the truth, he wouldn't call the police. He wouldn't call a hunter. He would call a psych ward. He would look at me with pity, sign the papers, and I would lose my license. I would lose my livelihood. I would be the crazy trucker who cracked under the pressure of the lonely road. A steer, I lied. The word tasted like ash. A stray steer. Must have been a Brahmin or something huge. It was black, middle of the road on Route 93. I didn't have time to stop. Brown stood up, looking from me to the truck. He looked at the shattered windshield, high up where a cow's body shouldn't reach. He looked at the claw marks on the door, which looked nothing like the impact of a blunt animal body. A steer did this, he pointed to the gouges. That looks like metal shear. That looks like something grabbed you. Horns, I said quickly, the lie evolving to cover the gaps. It had massive horns. When I clipped it, it spun. The horns raked the side. I panicked. Brown, I just kept driving. I didn't want to be stranded out there in the dark. Brown stared at the marks for a long, uncomfortable silence. I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew physics. He knew trucks. He knew that a steer, no matter how big, doesn't punch holes in a hood from the top down. He knew that horns don't leave clean, parallel grooves 3 inches deep in hardened steel. But the alternative was impossible. The alternative was that something with hands and claws strong enough to tear metal had attacked a moving semi-truck. And Brown, like most people, needed the world to make sense. He needed cause and effect. A steer, he repeated slowly, forcing the square peg into the round hole. Must have been a monster. A damn freak of nature. Yeah, I whispered, looking at the dark tuft of fur still caught in the jagged metal of the door handle. It was coarse, black, and definitely not bovine. Brown missed it, or maybe he chose not to see it. A freak of nature. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Go inside, get some water. I'll get the paperwork started for the insurance. We'll mark it as a wildlife collision. But Ken, take a few days, you look like you've seen a ghost. I have, I murmured, but he was already walking away, clipboard in hand, rationalizing the impossible into columns and rows on a spreadsheet. I stood alone in the bay, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. I reached out and plucked the tuft of black fur from the door handle. It felt oily and stiff between my fingers. I shoved it deep into my pocket, my hand trembling uncontrollably. Brown accepted the lie because he had the luxury of denial. I didn't. I had the proof in my pocket, and the memory of those yellow eyes burned into my soul. I was safe in the light of the warehouse, but I knew with a terrifying certainty that the darkness wasn't done with me. The drive from the distribution center to my house in Gilbert usually takes about 40 minutes. It's a drive I've done 1,000 times. A transition zone where I usually shed the skin of the road warrior and put on the skin of the suburban husband. I usually listen to sports radio, think about what Stephanie might be making for dinner, or wonder if the pool pump needs fixing. That morning the drive felt like a reconnaissance mission through enemy territory. I was in my personal pickup, a sturdy Ford F-150, but after being in the Kenworth it felt like I was driving a go-kart. I felt exposed. The windows were thin. The doors were light. Every car that passed me on the freeway made me flinch, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see a dark, hulking shape keeping pace with traffic, running on 2 backward-bending legs. When I turned onto my street, the sun was just starting to bleed over the Superstition Mountains, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. It was a beautiful Arizona morning. The sprinklers were hissing on the manicured lawns. A neighbor was jogging with headphones on. It was a picture of perfect, manufactured safety. I hated it. I looked at these houses, stucco and wood, glass windows, flimsy wooden fences, and for the first time I didn't see a neighborhood. I saw a buffet. I saw rows of cardboard boxes filled with soft, unsuspecting people who thought a deadbolt from Home Depot could keep out the dark. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. My hands were still shaking. I looked at my house, the place Stephanie and I had spent 10 years paying off. It used to look like a sanctuary. Now, the big bay window in the living room just looked like an fragility, a giant eye waiting to be punched out. Stephanie met me at the door. She must have heard the truck. She was wearing her robe, holding a mug of coffee, a smile already forming on her lips. That smile died the second she saw my face. "Kenny," she stepped back, her hand going to her mouth. "Oh my God, what happened? You look like you've been in a wreck." I walked past her, stepping into the cool, air-conditioned foyer. "I'm fine," I said, the lie automatic and hollow. "Just a long run, rough night." "You're shaking," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. Her hand was warm, soft. I flinched away from it. I didn't want to be touched. I felt like I was vibrating at a frequency that would shatter her if she got too close. "I just need a shower," I muttered, heading for the hallway. "I need to wash the road off." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. Then I checked the lock again. Then I pushed my weight against it to make sure the latch held. I stripped off my clothes, which smelled of diesel and fear, and threw them in the corner. I stood under the scalding water for 20 minutes, scrubbing my skin until it was red, trying to get the feeling of those yellow eyes off me. But when I turned off the water, that's when I smelled it. The bathroom was sealed. The fan was off. It should have smelled like the lavender soap Stephanie buys. But cutting through the steam, sharp and undeniable, was a scent that made my stomach heave. Copper, penny-like and metallic, mixed with the wet, musky stench of a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. And underneath it all, that strange, electric scent of ozone, like the air right before a lightning strike. I froze, dripping wet, staring at the bathroom door. It was here. I scrambled out of the tub, nearly slipping on the tile. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist, throwing the door open. Stephanie. She was in the kitchen making toast. She jumped when I shouted, "Kenneth, what is it?" "Did you open the windows?" I demanded, marching into the kitchen, my wet footprints slapping on the hardwood. "Did you leave the back door open?" "No," she said, confused and starting to look frightened. "The AC is on. Everything is closed. Kenny, you're scaring me. What is that smell?" She smelled it too. It wasn't in my head. I didn't answer her. I ran to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Locked. I ran to the kitchen window. Locked. I went room to room, checking every latch, every deadbolt, every window pane. "Kenny, stop!" Stephanie grabbed my arm in the living room. "What is going on? You smell like... God, it smells like old blood." I looked at her, my eyes wild. "It followed me," I whispered, the realization crashing down on me like a landslide. "It's not just on the road, it's on me." I reached into the pocket of my discarded jeans in the bathroom and pulled out the tuft of fur I'd taken from the truck door. I didn't show it to her. I just squeezed it in my fist, feeling the coarse, oily texture. It was the anchor. I had brought a piece of it home, and the scent, the pheromones, the curse, whatever it was, had bled into my house. "I need to go to the store," I said abruptly. "You need to sleep," Stephanie countered, her voice rising in panic. "You haven't slept in 24 hours. You're acting paranoid." "I'm not paranoid," I snapped, the volume making her recoil. "I'm prepared. You don't know what's out there, Steph. You think this door keeps us safe. This door is nothing. It's balsa wood." I spent the next 6 hours in a fever state. I didn't sleep. I drove to the hardware store and maxed out our credit card. I bought 4 heavy-duty slide bolts, the kind you use for warehouse gates. I bought lengths of steel bar. I bought motion sensor floodlights, the brightest ones they had, industrial grade. Stephanie watched me from the kitchen table, tears in her eyes, as I drilled holes into our door frames. I installed a slide bolt at the top and bottom of the front door. I cut lengths of wood to jam into the tracks of the sliding glass doors so they couldn't be forced open. I went outside in the blazing afternoon sun and mounted the floodlights on every corner of the house. aiming them so that not a single inch of the yard would be left in shadow. "Kenneth, please," she begged quietly when I finally came back inside, sweating and manic. "Talk to me. Tell me what happened. Did someone try to rob you?" I looked at her standing there in the middle of our living room. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to tell her about the wall of fur on the highway, the intelligent eyes, the claws that peeled steel like an orange. But if I told her, the infection would spread to her mind too. She would be just as afraid as I was. Or worse, she would think I was insane. "I just want us to be safe," I said, my voice trembling. "The world isn't what we thought it was, Steph. I just want to be ready." I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The smell of copper and wet fur was fainter now, masked by the sawdust and the metallic tang of the new locks, but I knew it was still there. I touched the cold steel of the new slide bolt. It felt solid. It felt heavy. But deep down, as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, I knew it wasn't enough. I remembered the way that thing had looked at me through the glass. It hadn't been stopped by a truck doing 80. A few deadbolts weren't going to keep it out. I wasn't fortifying a castle. I was locking myself inside a cage. And I had the terrible, sinking feeling that the key was already in the monster's hand. For 3 nights, the industrial floodlights turned my backyard into a sterile, white wasteland. The shadows had nowhere to hide. I sat in my armchair by the sliding glass door, the new steel bolt cold against my back, staring out at the illuminated grass. I slept in 20-minute bursts, waking up with my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I heard scratching at the door. Stephanie had stopped arguing with me. She just moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red-rimmed, watching her husband turn into a stranger who prowled the hallways with a flashlight at 3 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet. It was that deep suburban silence that usually means safety, but to me it felt like a held breath. Next door to the east lived Nick. He was a retired guy nice enough who spent his days washing his Corvette and walking his beagle, Buster. Buster was a good dog but noisy. He barked at everything: squirrels, the mailman, the wind. I used to find it annoying. Now I found myself waiting for that bark. It was an alarm system I didn't have to pay for. If something came near the perimeter, Buster would know. On the fourth night, around 3:15 a.m., the silence broke. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't the rhythmic, warning woof of a dog alerting its master. It was a single, high-pitched yelp. It sounded like a squeaky toy being stepped on, sharp and abrupt, and then it was instantly cut off. The silence that followed was heavy. It was wrong. I was out of the chair in a second, my hand gripping the heavy maglite I'd started carrying. I pressed my face against the glass of the sliding door, trying to see past the glare of my own floodlights into the darkness of Nick's yard. The wall separating our properties was a standard 6-foot cinder block fence. I couldn't see over it, but I could see the top of the oleander bushes thrashing violently for a second, then stilling. "Kenny," Stephanie's voice came from the hallway, trembling. "What was that?" "Stay here," I hissed. "Do not open this door." "I'm calling the police," she whispered. "Do it," I said, though I knew they wouldn't get here in time. I unlocked the slide bolts I had installed, clack, clack, and slid the door open just enough to squeeze through. The desert heat hit me instantly, dry and suffocating. The smell hit me second. It was stronger tonight. That copper tang of fresh blood mixed with the wet, musky odor of a predator. It rolled over the fence like a fog. I crept across the grass, the flashlight off to keep my position hidden, though the motion sensor floods were blazing. I reached the cinder block wall and listened. Nothing. No growling, no eating noises, just absolute dead silence. I pulled myself up, peering over the wall into Nick's yard. The motion sensor light on Nick's back patio clicked on, flooding his yard with yellow light. And there, in the center of his pristine lawn, was a message. Buster wasn't just dead, he had been disassembled. It wasn't the messy work of a coyote pack or the brute force of a mountain lion. It was methodical. The poor animal lay in two distinct pieces, severed with surgical precision. But what made bile rise in my throat was the arrangement. The head was placed carefully on the bottom step of Nick's patio, facing the sliding glass door. Its eyes were open, staring blindly into the house where its master slept. It wasn't feeding, it was terrorism. I dropped back down to my side of the wall, my legs shaking so hard I nearly collapsed. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting. The cruelty of it was human. Animals killed to survive. This thing had killed to instill fear. It was telling us, I can touch you whenever I want. I turned to run back to the house, to drag Stephanie into the bathroom and lock the door until the police arrived. But my foot caught on something in the soft earth of my wife's flower bed. I stumbled, aiming the flashlight at the ground to regain my balance. The beam of light landed on the soil right beneath the weeping willow tree in the corner of my yard, the one spot the floodlights didn't fully reach. I froze. The world narrowed down to the circle of light on the ground. There, pressed deep into the damp mulch, was a footprint. I had seen bear tracks. I had seen mountain lion pug marks. This was neither. It was enormous, easily 18 inches long. It had the general shape of a canine print, 4-toe pads and a larger pad behind them, but the proportions were grotesque. The claws had dug inches into the earth, leaving deep, gouged furrows, but it was the heel that made my blood run cold. A dog walks on its toes. Its heel is high up the leg. This print had a heavy, elongated heel impression, planted firmly in the dirt. It had stood flat-footed. It had stood like a man. I knelt beside it, my hand trembling as I hovered it over the impression. My hand looked like a child's toy next to it. The sheer weight required to sink that deep into the packed earth was terrifying. We were talking about something that weighed 500, maybe 600 pounds. And the direction. I shined the light forward. There was another print and another. They weren't moving toward the wall to get to Nick's dog. They were facing my house. The creature hadn't just jumped the wall, killed the dog, and left. It had stood here under the cover of the weeping willow for God knows how long. It had stood here on two legs, watching me sitting in my chair. It had watched me patrol the house. It had watched me install the locks. It had been right here, 10 yards away, hidden in the one shadow I hadn't illuminated, studying its prey. The sudden sound of a siren wailing in the distance broke the spell. I scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the print as if it were a landmine. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the back door, slamming it shut and throwing the bolts home. Stephanie was standing in the kitchen, clutching the phone, her face pale. "They're coming," she said. "Kenny, you're white. What did you see?" I looked at her, and then I looked at the glass door I had just locked. I looked at the flimsy slide bolts. I looked at the darkness pressing against the glass. "It knows," I whispered, my voice sounding fractured and distant. "It knows which house is mine. The dog. The dog was just a warning shot, Steph. It was just knocking on the door." I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the kitchen window. "Get away from the glass. We need to go upstairs. We need to get the gun." "Kenny, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, dragging her toward the stairs. "You should be scared. It was standing in the flower bed, Stephanie. It was watching us." As we huddled in the upstairs hallway, waiting for the blue lights to flash against the walls, I knew the war had officially moved from the highway to my home. The ambush wasn't over. It had just relocated. And looking at the flimsy drywall and glass that made up my life, I knew we didn't stand a chance. The police report called it predation by a large mountain lion. They took photos of Nick's backyard. They bagged the remains of poor Buster, and they nodded sympathetically when I pointed out the footprint in my flower bed. One of the younger officers, a guy who looked like he was barely out of high school, suggested it was a double register, a bear stepping in its own track, creating the illusion of a larger, elongated foot. I didn't argue. I didn't scream that bears don't have heels like men, or that mountain lions don't display trophies on patio steps. I just nodded, signed their statement and watched them drive away. They were the rational world, retreating to the safety of their explanations. I was left in the irrational world, the one where monsters checked the locks before deciding when to come in. The breaking point for Stephanie wasn't the dead dog, it was the windows. The morning after the attack, I went to Home Depot again. I bought sheets of 3/4-inch plywood and 3-inch deck screws. I spent the entire afternoon boarding up the downstairs windows. The sound of the drill whining and the wood cracking as the screws bit deep echoed through the house like gunshots. I was sealing us in. I was turning our open, airy suburban home into a bunker. Stephanie stood in the hallway, watching me cover the view of the front lawn. Her suitcase was already packed and sitting by the door. I had pretended not to see it for the last hour, but the silence between us had grown so thick it felt like I was wading through wet concrete. "Kenny," she said softly. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that scared me more than her shouting ever could. "I can't live in a cave." I lowered the drill, the smell of sawdust and nervous sweat clinging to me. "It's not a cave, Steph. It's a perimeter. You saw what happened to Buster. You saw the footprint." "I saw a footprint," she acknowledged, tears welling in her eyes. "And I saw a dead dog. It's horrible, but Kenny, this," she gestured to the plywood covering the window, blocking out the afternoon sun. "This isn't safety. This is a prison. You're building a prison." "I'm keeping it out," I snapped, the lack of sleep fraying my temper. "Do you think a pane of glass is going to stop something that can tear a truck door open? I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this so we survive the night." She shook her head slowly, a tear escaping and tracking through the makeup she hadn't bothered to fix. "You're not doing this for us. You're doing this because you're sick. You need help, Kenny, real help, not plywood, not shotguns." She walked over to the suitcase. The sound of the wheels rolling across the hardwood floor was deafening in the quiet house. It was the sound of my life unraveling. "I'm going to my sister in Mesa," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "I love you, I really do, but I can't stay here and watch you lose your mind. I can't sleep with a machete under the pillow anymore." I took a step toward her, my hand reaching out. "Steph, don't, please. If you leave, you're out there, you're vulnerable. Here, I can protect you." "You can't even protect yourself from your own thoughts," she whispered. She opened the door, letting in a slice of blinding Arizona sunlight. It looked alien compared to the dim, wood-paneled gloom I had created inside. "Call me when you take the boards down. Call me when you're ready to see a doctor." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut. I stood there for a long time, staring at the heavy steel deadbolt. The lock didn't just keep things out, it kept people out. It kept normalcy out. I walked over and threw the slide bolts, top and bottom. Clack, clack. The house was silent. Usually there was the sound of the TV, or Stephanie humming in the kitchen, or the washing machine running. Now there was just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. The air felt stagnant, recycled. I had sealed the house so tight it felt like a submarine submerged in deep, hostile water. I was alone. The sun went down and the house plunged into darkness. I didn't turn on the lamps. I didn't want to silhouette myself against the cracks in the plywood. I moved through the rooms by memory, checking my perimeter. Front door, secured. Back door, secured. Windows, boarded. I went to the kitchen and poured a cup of cold coffee, my hands trembling slightly less now that I didn't have to hide it from Stephanie. I sat in my armchair in the living room, the shotgun resting across my lap, the machete on the floor beside me. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Total control, no variables, no one to worry about but myself. But as the hours ticked by, 9:00 p.m., 10:00 p.m., midnight, the isolation began to curdle. Without Stephanie's presence to anchor me to reality, my mind started to drift. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a footstep. The wind brushing a branch against the siding sounded like claws testing the wood. I stared at the monitors of the security cameras I had set up on my laptop. 4 grayscale views of the exterior, the driveway, the front porch, the backyard, the side gate. They showed nothing but empty, illuminated concrete and grass. The world outside was still, but the silence wasn't empty, it was expectant. It felt like the eye of a hurricane. I realized then that by sending Stephanie away, I hadn't just secured the perimeter, I had cleared the battlefield. The creature hadn't attacked when Stephanie was here. It had waited. It had killed the dog to scare her, to drive her away. It wanted me alone. It wanted to isolate the prey from the herd. A soft scratching sound came from the roof, directly above my head. I froze, my eyes darting to the ceiling. It was faint, rhythmic scritch, 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 like heavy nails dragging across the shingles. I looked at the monitors. The yard was empty. The perimeter was clear. It wasn't on the ground anymore. I racked the slide of the shotgun, the sound loud and violent in the empty house. I wasn't the warden of a fortress anymore. I was a rat in a box, and the cat was walking on the lid. The psychological wall I had built to keep the fear at bay crumbled. I wasn't safe. I was just packaged for delivery. And as the scratching moved slowly across the ceiling toward the chimney, I realized that the hardest part of the night was just beginning. The scratching on the roof stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was heavier than the scratching itself. I stood in the center of the living room, the shotgun raised toward the ceiling, tracing the path of the noise. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet house. I waited for the sound of shingles tearing, for the crash of a heavy body breaking through the rafters and drywall. I was ready to fire upward, to fill the attic with lead. But the attack didn't come from above. Instead, the house plunged into absolute darkness. There was no flicker, no brownout, just an instant, total amputation of light. The floodlights outside died. The lamp by my chair vanished. The comforting blue glow of the security monitors on my laptop blinked out, leaving me staring at a black screen. The hum of the refrigerator cut off. The air conditioning unit outside groaned and fell silent. Blindness. No, I whispered, the word swallowed by the sudden void. No, you didn't. I fumbled for the maglite on the floor, my fingers brushing the cold steel of the machete. I grabbed the light but didn't turn it on yet. I knew what this meant. A blown fuse happens inside. A total power cut happens outside, at the breaker box on the side of the house. It had climbed down. It hadn't been trying to break in through the roof. It had been a distraction. It wanted me looking up while it went to work on the ground. It understood electricity. It understood that my eyes were useless without the floods. It had disarmed the fortress with the flip of a switch. Then I heard it. The sound came from the kitchen, the distinct, wet crunch of wood splintering under pressure. It wasn't the front door with the steel bolts. It wasn't the boarded-up windows. It was the basement door. The one weak point I hadn't reinforced with steel, because the only way into the basement was through a tiny window I thought was too small for anything larger than a cat. I was wrong. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps moved from the tile of the kitchen onto the hardwood of the hallway. Thump, thump, click, the click of claws on wood. I retreated, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall of the living room. I was cornered. The hallway was a tunnel of darkness, and the thing was in it. I raised the shotgun, pressing the stock so hard against my shoulder it hurt. I didn't turn on the flashlight. If I turned it on, I would reveal my position. I had to wait. I had to let it come to me. The smell arrived before the sound. The air in the living room grew thick, suffocating. The metallic tang of copper and ozone washed over me, so strong I could taste it on the back of my tongue. It smelled like a slaughterhouse floor that had been electrified. "I know you're there," I breathed, my voice trembling. A low vibration answered me. It wasn't a growl. It was a purr, a deep, chest-rattling sound of amusement. It was close, 10 feet, 15. 2 points of light appeared in the blackness of the hallway. They hovered about 7 feet off the ground. They weren't reflecting any ambient light because there was none. They were generating it. Sickly, yellow-green irises burning with a cold, nuclear luminance. They blinked once slowly and then locked onto me. It could see me perfectly in the dark. It was watching me cower against the wall. "Come on," I screamed, the terror snapping into a jagged, hysterical rage. The eyes dipped, the creature crouching, and then it launched. I didn't think, I squeezed the trigger. The boom of the 12 gauge was deafening in the confined space. The muzzle flash was a stroke of lightning that illuminated the nightmare for a fraction of a second. I saw it midair, a wall of black fur, teeth bared in a rictus of hate, claws reaching for my face. The slug hit it dead center in the chest. The impact stopped its forward momentum like it had hit a brick wall. The creature was thrown backward, slamming into the hallway floor with a sound like a sack of wet cement. I heard a roar that shook the window panes, a sound of pain and fury that wasn't remotely human. I racked the slide, clack, clack, and fired again into the darkness where it had fallen. The second flash showed me the creature scrambling, its movements fluid and unnatural. It wasn't dead. It wasn't even slowed down. It was rolling, using the momentum to spring off the wall. Before I could pump the shotgun a third time, it was on me. The collision felt like being hit by a car. The shotgun flew from my hands, skittering across the floor. I was thrown onto my back, the air exploding from my lungs. A massive, heavy weight pinned me to the floorboards. I gasped, staring up into the yellow eyes hovering inches from my face. Hot saliva, thick with the smell of rot, dripped onto my cheek. A hand, not a paw, a hand with fingers like iron bars, closed around my throat, lifting my head off the ground. The pressure was immense. I clawed at the furry wrist, my nails useless against the hide. It growled, a sound that vibrated through my skull. It wasn't trying to kill me instantly. If it wanted to, it could have snapped my neck like a dry twig. It was squeezing slowly. It wanted me to know who had won. It wanted to look me in the eye while the lights went out for good. My right hand, pinned under my body, brushed against something cold on the floor. The machete. My vision was spotting with gray dots. The lack of oxygen was burning in my chest. I stopped clawing at its arm. I let my body go limp, playing possum. The creature hesitated, its grip loosening just a fraction as it sensed the fight leaving me. In that second of confusion, I gripped the handle of the machete. With the last ounce of strength I possessed, I ripped the blade upward in a frantic, blind arc. I didn't aim. I just swung for the darkness. The steel connected. I felt the blade bite deep into muscle and bone. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, warbling sound that shattered the heavy atmosphere. The weight vanished from my chest as it recoiled, stumbling back into the living room furniture. I heard a lamp crash. I heard the coffee table splinter. I scrambled backward on my elbows, gasping for air, coughing violently. I grabbed the maglite and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust and gun smoke. The creature was standing by the sliding glass door, one hand clutching its side. Dark, black blood was pouring between its fingers, pooling on the carpet. It looked at me, its lips pulled back to reveal gums stained with its own blood. The arrogance was gone from its eyes, replaced by a shock of pain. I scrambled for the shotgun, racking it one more time. "Get out!" I roared, leveling the barrel at its head. It looked at the gun, then at the wound in its side. It realized the game had changed. It snarled, a final promise of violence, and then turned. It didn't bother with the door mechanism. It simply lowered its shoulder and rammed the glass. The reinforced glass, backed by the wood I had jammed in the track, exploded outward. The creature vanished into the night, leaving a jagged hole in my fortress and a trail of black blood on my floor. I sat there in the ruins of my living room, the shotgun pointed at the broken door, listening to the heavy footfalls fading into the desert. I was alive, but as I looked at the blood soaking into the carpet, I knew this wasn't a victory. I had hurt it. I had made it bleed, And now it wouldn't just be hunting for sport. It would be hunting for revenge. The blue and red strobes of the police cruisers didn't make me feel safe this time. They just felt like a strobe light on a crime scene, illuminating the wreckage of my life in alternating flashes of color. I sat on the tailgate of the ambulance, a thermal blanket wrapped around my shoulders, though I wasn't cold. I was shivering from the adrenaline crash, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that wouldn't stop. The house looked like a war zone. The front window was boarded with plywood that now hung askew. The back sliding glass door was gone, just a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth of safety glass. Inside, the living room was a kaleidoscope of destruction, splintered furniture, shattered lamps, and blood. So much blood. It wasn't mine. The paramedics had checked me over. Aside from severe bruising on my chest and throat where the creature had pinned me, I was intact. The blood pooling on my living room carpet and smearing the hallway walls was dark, almost black. It smelled of rust and ammonia, a chemical stench that made the K9 unit in the driveway whine and refuse to leave the car. Officer Davis was the one in charge. He was an older guy, pot-bellied with a thick, tired mustache that drooped over the corners of his mouth. He looked like a man who had spent 30 years seeing the worst people had to offer, and tonight his face was pale. He walked out of the house, stepping carefully over the broken glass, and approached the ambulance. He held a flashlight in one hand and a plastic evidence bag in the other. Inside the bag was my machete, coated in the dark, viscous fluid. "Mr. Kenneth," he said, his voice grave. He didn't ask me what happened. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just looked at me with eyes that were wide and unsettled. "We need to talk about what's in your house." I told the dispatcher, I rasped, my throat raw from being crushed. "It broke in. I defended myself." Davis nodded slowly, looking back at the open wound of my home. "I see that. You hit it with a slug and you gutted it with this." He lifted the bag. "There's enough blood in that hallway to kill a grizzly bear, but the lab boys, they're going to have a hard time with this." "Why?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Because blood dries," Davis said quietly, leaning in close so the other officers couldn't hear. "It coagulates. This stuff, it's bubbling. It's like it's boiling on the carpet. And the smell. I served in the Gulf, son. I know the smell of death. This smells like something else." He signaled to another officer, and they motioned for me to follow. We walked around the side of the house to the backyard. The floodlights I had installed were back on. Someone had flipped the breaker back, illuminating the scene with a harsh, unforgiving glare. The trail of blood was easy to follow. It was a thick, black line that led from the shattered door, across the patio, and into the grass. It went past the weeping willow, past the spot where the footprint had been found days ago, and out the back gate that had been ripped off its hinges. "We tracked it," Davis said, shining his light on the ground. "Heavy bleeding, staggering gait. You heard it bad, Kenneth. By all rights, it should have dropped within 100 yards. We walked out the back gate, into the open desert scrub that bordered the subdivision. The trail continued for about 50 yards, weaving between the creosote bushes and cacti, and then, abruptly, it stopped. Davis stopped and pointed his beam at the sand. "Look." I looked, the black splashes ended. There was a final, large pool of blood, and then nothing, no footprints leading away, no drag marks. The sand beyond the pool was pristine, undisturbed by wind or animal. "It vanished," I whispered. "Whatever it is," Davis said, his voice tight, "it stopped bleeding just like that, like a faucet being turned off. And the tracks, it's like it grew wings." He turned his light on me, blinding me for a second. "I've been a cop for 30 years. I've seen mountain lion attacks. I've seen meth heads do crazy things. But creatures don't just stop bleeding after taking a 12-gauge slug to the chest. They don't disappear into thin air." He clicked the light off, leaving us in the semi-darkness of the desert night. The silence out here was different now. It wasn't empty. It felt heavy, watchful. "What are you saying, officer?" Davis sighed, a long, weary exhalation. I'm saying I can't put this in a report. If I write down what I see, giant bipedal tracks, unidentified blood, a creature that takes shotgun rounds and vanishes, they'll take my badge and put you in a padded room. The report will say you fired at an intruder. The intruder fled. We found no suspect. He stepped closer, his face grim. But off the record, you need to leave tonight. I looked at him startled. Leave. This thing knows where you live, Davis said. You hurt it. You humiliated it. Creatures like this, they hold a grudge. And if it can heal fast enough to stop bleeding in 50 yards, it's going to come back. And next time it won't be playing with the lights. He was right. I felt it in my gut, a cold, sinking stone of truth. The ambush on the highway hadn't been the end. The siege on the house hadn't been the end. It was an escalation. Go somewhere dry, Davis murmured, looking out at the endless dark horizon. Somewhere with no trees, somewhere crowded. Disappear, Kenneth, become a ghost, because if you stay here, you're a dead man. I packed what was left of my life into a single duffel bag that night. I didn't wait for the insurance adjuster. I didn't wait for Stephanie to come back. I called her and told her to sell the house, to keep the money, to stay away. I told her I was leaving for her own good. She cried, but she didn't try to stop me. I think she knew, deep down, that the man she married had died in that hallway. I drove south. I didn't stop until I hit the scorched pavement of Phoenix, and even then I kept looking in the rearview mirror. That was 6 months ago. I live in a small apartment complex now on the second floor. I work in a warehouse, driving a forklift under bright, buzzing halogen lights. I never go out at night. I never drive on the open highway. I look like a ghost now. My skin is pale from living indoors. My hands have a permanent tremor that makes it hard to hold a coffee cup. I sleep in 20-minute bursts, a loaded shotgun propped against the nightstand and a machete under the mattress. I should feel safe. I'm surrounded by concrete and people. But sometimes when the wind blows from the north, carrying the heat of the deep desert, I catch a scent. It's faint, but it cuts through the smog and the city smells. Copper, ozone, wet fur. It's out there, it's healing, it's remembering. I told you this story not because I want you to believe me. I told you because you need to know that the safety you feel in your car, in your locked house, is an illusion. There are things in the dark that don't care about your laws or your locks. They are waiting for you to make a mistake. They are waiting for you to feel safe. So if you're driving down a lonely highway tonight and you see a shadow on the road that looks a little too tall, a little too dark, don't stop. Don't slow down. Pray to whatever God you believe in and drive. Because if you stop, you might find out that the ambush has already begun.